Yes, Dr. Bhattacharya. Today I am from home, but not well. I am very ill. I had viral pneumonia. Yesterday I was released from yes, Dr. Bhattacharya. Today I am from home, but still I am very not only very ill. I have that infection also, viral pneumonia. Yesterday I was released from yes, Dr. Bhattacharya. It's not today I am from home, but still I am very.
Yes, I think Kumalidev, we should start at 7 because people know it's from 7.
Yes.
So we will start sharp at 7.
Yes. Yes, the day before, on the day before yesterday, it was. I think today Amrita will join. She has worked on phospholipid emulsifiers. So, phospholipid as emulsifiers, as phospholipids are very big molecules as emulsifiers. Mm, mm, a particular percentage. I don't remember those percentages. We have already patented, filed a patent with it, and Shuprotim, you know very well Shuprotim. Shuprotim works with me, and Shuprotim came and said that you have done a good job, and it was the nano emulsion was synthesized in a low energy method, that is by uh, evaporating the solvents by solvent evaporation method. Is Amrita here, or she hasn't joined? If she had joined, she would have tell you much better way. Mm, and that was a very nice emulsion and very stable emulsion. Yesterday you told that stability is a very important factor. So we measured the stability for about 6 months, and it was a very stable emulsion. Uh, and Shupratim helped us to measure all those interfaces in his laboratory at Canada, and phospholipid acts as a very good emulsion. One thing I want to know from you is that why we studied it because co-emulsifiers, using not only one emulsifier but using two emulsifiers, increase the stability, increase the HLB value, and could you after the session could you please explain how it helps to stabilize emulsions when the molecules are big enough, the emulsifiers, then if we give us another co-emulsifier with smaller size, then they pack in a better way as emulsions, and we have seen it with span and twin and all these emulsifiers also. Please.
Pupaladi, can you hear me? Pupaladi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, today, my apologies. Today I forgot to get my headset. I'm taking the call from home today. So I'm speaking out through the laptop. Let me just close it 1 second to avoid external noises. Yeah, when you talk about emulsions, and specifically it's using lecithin as an emulsifier, it depends a lot on how much of the internal phase you're trying to emulsify, right?
Yes.
As a phospholipid, I mean, it's not very potent as an emulsifier. If you do an hydrolyzed lecithin, if you cleave off a fatty acid, then it has much better emulsifying property. But you have to be also be careful that lecithins can display some anti-crystallization behavior. So it can prevent crystal packing of anything that you are trying to do, use as a Pickering stabilizer, or if you have a hot stock in the liquid oil blends. Okay, so that has an impact. The effect of temperature will play a role. So
Yes,
are you, and
effect of temperature.
yeah, and when you talk about what do you call it, the secondary emulsifiers, most likely they are the ones who will reduce the surface tension much faster compared to lecithin. You know, if you have 20% water in 80% oil, it's very easy because the shear is enough to break down that 20% water to form the internal phases. But if you move from 20 to 30 to 40, increasing the amount of internal phase, then it becomes more tricky because you're creating much more interface, right? Much more interfaces, and therefore you need what we call more proper traditional emulsifiers. And you have to find the balance that if you go for much higher HLB ones, they would prefer oil in water.
Okay.
So depending whether you want an water in oil and oil in water, your choice of emulsifier
Yes.
will affect the stability of the emulsions. So you have to, having the droplet sized, breaking the added phase into droplets is the easy part, but rendering the right amount of kinetic stability over a period of time as a function of temperature or any shear you will do for evaluation, that's an interesting part. That's the challenging part.
And we
So
we worked on about 2.5 years to make that stable emulsion. When at a particular percentage, how it stabilizes, it's a very an interesting way how it stabilized. And Shrupatim
yeah, and
helped
one of the
in that.
and one of the things what is very important, that if you are using any kind of agitation, right,
Mm,
either whether it's a scrape surface mechanism or a propeller kind of agitator or a paddle mixer, what
mm,
is important, what we call the annular space. For example,
mm,
the distance between the axial point to the
mm,
surface, the
mm,
thicker it is,
mm.
the more, the less is the turbulent force inside that donut shaped emulsion area, right? So how much of the vortex are you creating? Are you sucking any air into it?
Actually,
So there are
you are
many
all
parameters.
talking about oil, water in oil emulsions, and we are all talking about oil in water emulsions.
Yeah, well, that's the easy part. That's why, see, I've spoken to Supratim and his professor Derek Rousseau and everybody else that oil in water emulsion, you can easily add some hydrocolloids, a bit of protein or any dated polysorbate, bit of twin 80, twin 60, and you need the right hydrocolloid to stabilize. The role of crystalline fat in that is not very pronounced. It's not very desirable. Right?
Actually,
So
we are always working with body fluids. That is, we have to give it intravenously or by. Sir is calling. Let me take sir's
sure,
phone.
sure. Well, can anybody help me understand that? Can you see my slides?
Yes, your slides are visible. Your
Okay,
slides are
so
visible.
yeah,
Yes, slides
do you see the
visible.
slide change? Can you see the slides changing?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, good, because I think PowerPoint was acting a bit funny today.
On, but we could see it previously. We see the slide was also changing. Everything was happening
Okay,
perfectly.
good. Okay, good. Because now it has got like an infinite mirror reflections.
Yes.
Abhiri, please help Sir to join. Sir is trying to join, but no one is letting
But No, but it's not coming. I'm letting everyone in. Whoever is.
Sir is telling that no one is letting me.
But but here it's not showing. I think because I am letting in everyone whosoever is pinging.
I think Subali, you guide sir something how to join. Maybe he's doing something.
I think.
You sir just have a talk with him to guide him how to join. It may be like that.
Sir
Well,
is
Avadi,
telling
should we
that.
start? Should we start? It's 5 minutes over time. Or
I
should we
think
give another few
we
minutes?
should start. I think we should
Okay.
start.
Okay, then let me switch the PowerPoint on. And as I also mentioned the other day, I mean, once I put it on full screen, I mean, all the participants, the viewer panel disappears.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so in principle, I'm
Okay.
talking
Yeah.
talking to a laptop.
I'll
And my,
give an course of that, then you can start.
sure,
So,
please, thank you.
okay. So a very good evening, all of you again. Second day of our lecture series. So today, Mr. Kaustuv Bhattacharya will be presenting us giving an insight about the emulsifier and its role in oil structuring. So I just a second. Someone is. Yes, so I am we on behalf of Oil Technology Eastern Zone is again very much privileged to have you for your second day lecture. The first day we were very enlightened to have an insight about the emulsifier, its role, its contributions, and today we will be having an insight about its role regarding oil structuring. So since I have also worked a lot about
Sir is still calling.
but
Sir is
I
still
am
calling.
still calling, but Bhubaliji, it's not coming here because I am letting in everyone whosoever is pinging.
Well, Avadi, please confirm that he's taking the link for today. If he's trying to click the previous link, then it might not work.
Okay.
That may
Bhubaliji,
happen.
you send the fresh link for today. I think maybe. So we are very privileged to have Mr. Bhattacharya once again. So I think every one of us will be greatly benefited today again because most of the after the last day's lecture, all my students were very much happy to know about the roles of the emulsifier, and they really told me that, ma'am, we were very much enlightened with your lecture. So, I think again, you will enlighten us with all the things that you have in store for us today. So, with that, I would like to hand over the presentation to Mr. Kaustuv Bhattacharya for today's talk. Thank you. Kaustuv, you continue with your talk.
Sure. Well, thanks, Avadi. I think it's very kind of you to introduce me so graciously. And I think I also enjoyed the discussion, the post-talk discussions, and
yes, I think we will have more of it today. We will have more.
Sure, I hope so too. Today is a topic, and today the topic we are going to talk about. This is a perfect example of a subject that the more you know about it, you realize the more you have to know about it.
Yes.
Because with every passing day, with every new research paper that comes out, a new angle is thrown on fat crystallization.
Yes.
What actually happens, because it's a very complex phenomenon, right? We try our best. So with that in mind, I think just allow me to start the job. Okay. So it's a very good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming back today. I think it's about little over 7 o'clock at your end, and it's about 20 minutes to 4 in the afternoon for me out here. The topic we decided to discuss today is the functional role of emulsifiers in product structuring. Now, there are two aspects of this. One is, what do we mean by product structuring? And then how we can control it, modify it by using emulsifiers, which is only a part of the mechanism or part of the, the act that makes everything come together. Now, if there is only one slide you want to remember from the other day and today, let it be this slide, you know, because this one shows that the physical property of any food product you're going to make, including any cooking you do at home, depends on the physical structure. And that physical structure depends on the chemical composition, or we can choose to call it the formulation or the recipe. And they are how they are put together from mechanical treatment and temperature treatment. So basically, we all start from a blend or a mix or an emulsion, and then we subject it to downstream mechanical treatment with respect to as well temperature. So either we cool it or we heat it, either we whip it, mix it, and let it stand, and then it slowly builds up the structure that gives the physical property. So before we dive into the composition and the mechanical and the temperature part, we need to have a clear idea what kind of physical property we want. What are the critical to quality of that physical proper structure that we need? So once you know I need to measure these different parameters, then the second step is, or one step back, what are the major factors that affect each of these critical to quality points? The moment you have what are the major factors, then each major factor will depend on some minor factors. So if you jot down, if you make a fishbone diagram like this, then it becomes much easy to see which pathway should we take to get to those critical to quality parameters. So you get the optimal physical structure. That would give you the optimal or the expected physical property. And this structure is what we are going to try today. The image you see there, the three-dimensional fat crystal network, this is what we are trying to build. Whether we build it with a lot of fat systems or with pure emulsifiers or a combination, that's what we're going to see. Now, the point when it comes to this point that we can take an image of a solid structure, it's actually a phase transition from a liquid state to the solid stage, aided by either heat absorption or heat dissipation. So let's have a look how when we talk about stabilized emulsion or structures, what happens. Now, I think one of the greatest attribute or property of any crystalline fat or triglyceride molecules that present that make up oils and fat is that just by simply withdrawing or adding heat, we can change the molecular configurations of those triglycerides, which means that from solid fat to liquid oil, by supplying heat, we can dissociate, we can break down their structures of all different types. And then by withdrawing heat from that liquid oil matrix, we can reform that same crystal, that crystalline packing that we started from. And when it comes to food products, all these properties like consistency, texture, spreadability, emulsion stability, appearance, flavor release, mouthfeel, color, they all directly or indirectly depend on the extent of fat crystallization. Now, as I also mentioned the other day, that when we see a structure, we see the macro part of it. But it all starts from the initiation and building up of the microstructure. So the triglyceride molecules in the completely melted form, it undergoes heat exchange, mass exchange, momentum transfers, forms the initial nuclei, which form into crystals from the crystal clusters, then the clusters from network, and we get the macro, the bulk fat as we see. And it is that macro bulk fat which we then study with respect to could be rheology, strength, sensory, different X-rays or DSCs and all different things to see how the fat, how bulk structure has formed. And as you can see also, there is an increase in the structure. As it starts from the microscopic world to the macroscopic realm, there is a vast increase of the structure. It is like just building up from the tiniest part. I think, we all know the playing blocks when we had as kids, or even probably now, the Lego. When you build up a Lego structure, you all start from those small pieces. You build a base, and from that you go inward to outward, right? So imagine a crystallization process is something like that. So I really love you to visualize that how a crystalline network is forming. Because once you start to visualize any process happening, whether it's in your lab scale or in pilot plant or in production, then it's easy to visualize at any point that what are the factors that is affecting this particular stage of processing. Once you have that, then you can keep an eye on the different parameters of the processing factors, and then you can see, are we getting the desired result? If not, why not? What are the different aspects? So visualization of any crystallization process or a product formation is extremely important. Even in your lab scale, you take some liquid oil, you add some water. So along with how does it break down? How does it disperse? How does it stabilize? What are the changes I see? Do I see a change in viscosity immediately? Do I see a change in color? Do I see a drop in temperature? Do I see a rise in temperature? All different aspects. Every time you're working hands-on in a closed environment or even partially open, I really love you. I really urge you to always visualize what's happening. That helps, at least helped me to understand more and more every day as we work with it. So the structural hierarchy, as we were talking, that you get these nanoplatelet crystals, starting from the lamella, then you form some aggregates, the network, and then again the bulk fat. And this is one of the most zoomed in nanoplatelet structures of fat crystals. This came from Professor Marangoni's lab for the first time, but then now I think every research lab with some electron microscopes or different other microscopic tools are able to see those platelets. So there are 6 layers of plates that form that first crystal clusters, and then they stack up against each other, and then they aggregate, and then they form the bulk. Now, as we talk about transition of a liquid state to a solid state, this phase transition happens in steps as a function of heat exchange in this case. For example, and when we look at the time scale, in the first initial seconds, you have the super effect. The fat crystals, the melted triglyceride, it has to overcome an energy barrier before it starts actually forming the first initial liquid crystal cluster. Liquid crystal, and then the liquid crystal clusters. So as seconds go into minutes, the dimensions increase. As minutes continue, you start to get a crystal growth. And as minutes get into hours, you get different forms of recrystallization, whether it's a polymorphic shift, or is it melt-mediated crystallization, or is it just sintering or some osphole ripening. Variety of mechanism can happen simultaneously, what we lump together as recrystallization. And as recrystallization stabilizes over time, depending on the type of fat we have taken, which determines the length of time at which the time taken between recrystallization and more post-crystallization, it can lead to more product coarsening. And often it is termed as degradation, because you want to start as a fine crystal network that changes over time. But again, depending on if it's kind of a confectionery application or you're going to some kind of a margarine application, you try to fix or have the longest time in that period where we would study that matrix, or we would consume that product as a food product from the supermarket. So when we are talking about structuring of oils, you have to imagine something that has a measurable structure, right? And that would come from, again, the transformation of the liquid triglycerides into an organized, packed system. So once you have the supercool liquid, they would form the tiny, minutest of the crystal liquid crystals. They would get together, form a cluster, and you start forming different nuclei across the bulk. And once that nuclei is stable, it reaches a particular radius, it starts to drag in surrounding triglycerides, which are now past the cluster formation and starts to build up a network. Now, when you look into this schematics, you will notice that the first 3 steps, there's a reversible sign to it, meaning that any change of heat, any drop in the heat exchange, any drop in the cooling medium during the heat exchange process can cause an unstable nuclei to melt back. But so this is very critical, because any process that you start at a certain point and you want to reach another end point, your product is moving across the time scale using your different amount of your heat cooling capacity. But if the surface across which it is exposed to has a very negative temperature, -5, -10, -20 degrees centigrade. But if there is any other heat process involved, if it is too fast, any frictional heat, in production you have the water temperature that runs to the axis of the script surface. If that temperature is a bit too high, then the unstable nuclei that are a very nascent state, they can go back. So the whole product moves across your production plant or in your pilot plant or in your lab scale, and it's not getting enough cool. So you're delaying crystallization. So the initial part, you have to be careful that you got the temperatures correct, so it does not start getting back. So once you get a proper nucleus, it starts joining hands with the others, and it starts to grow as a crystal, as we call it, crystal growth and forming the network. The heat you are trying to dissipate, whether it's in a scrap surface unit or any kind of in a beaker, in an ice bath, or what have you, if you're trying to cool down, what you are trying to replace is what you are trying to withdraw. It will be highlighted in this equation. Two important aspects. One is the flow rate and the delta T. The temperature of the product you are exposing to the cooling surface and the temperature difference between the two, that has a huge impact on the heat loss. The second part important is that how do you handle the little latent heat of crystallization that is coming out of the crystals that is forming under shear. If these two things are not optimal, then you do not have a proper structure which can stabilize an emulsion or give you or form the final structure you're trying to form in that liquid matrix. Temperature, so it can withdraw heat continuously. Now, whether if you're using a liquid ammonia in a proper production plant, in a color plant, 15 is on the liquid ammonia transiting, and that's much easier. But on a lab scale, if you're using an ice bath, you have to be careful that the temperature of that water does not fluctuate too much. Because another aspect of any heat exchange mechanism is that you have typically a cylindrical format, and you have a stirring mechanism in between that actually forms kind of a series of donuts packed together. So if you look at from the top or from the side, you will see actually like a donut where the centrifugal force pushes the material across that cold surface, and the heat exchange actually happens through convection and conduction through that depth or the thickness of that donut. We call it the annular space. The bigger the annular space, lower is the heat exchange. The turbulent force is not that pronounced. So heat exchange slowing down will affect your rate of nucleation, rate of crystallization, and the whole chain of events. So if you can get a very thin annular space, it's much better heat exchange. And as the crystal structure forms, the turbulent force is often very more tangential than inside the turbulence. So that does not break down the structure too much. So any time you're going to cool down a product to develop a structure, there are two basic aspects. One is, the first part is the heat management, taking away the heat from the system, developing the crystals, and once that reaches a certain point, next part is the structure management, which focuses a lot on the mechanical part. So you don't destroy the physical structure you're forming. You're not losing the texture you're forming. So it's that combination of heat management and texture management that marries the crystal structures with the liquid components that might be inside. When you get a complete structured product, or let's say even an emulsion stabilized by some fat crystals, The liquid part does not crystallize, but it is very mobile, right? So once you develop those solid portions, once you develop the crystal structure, once you develop those crystal, increasing the crystal surface area, the rate of diffusion of the liquid oil or the liquid emulsion has to go inside and get stabilized. So that rate of diffusion of the liquid part into the solid part, that is dependent on a lot of factors. Let's talk about it soon now. When we discussed solute, or when we showed you the effect of the mechanism and the temperature treatment, this is an example with that pure sunflower oil, 97% sunflower oil mixed with 3% very high melting emulsifier. This is about 80 degrees melting point. If you cool down that system under stirring or without stirring under static conditions from 85 degrees to 22 degrees and put the system under a microscope, polarized microscope, you can clearly see the difference in the crystal structure. The one on the left slightly higher than that one on the right. You will see much more smaller, denser crystals appearing compared to the one on the right, where you tend to get much bigger structures. And it's like it's like the branch of a tree slowly expanding, dragging in different liquid crystals onto its surface. Now, the picture on the right, if you enough polarization, you will probably see crystals appearing on the darker region. But what remains a fact that when there is no agitation, the crystal growth is much slower. Once it grows slower, it is much bigger in size. So compared to the picture left on the right, you will see the one on the left has much smaller size of crystals and much huge number of crystals, which increases the crystal size area for all kinds of product entrapments. The one on the right, it has much lower number of crystals and hence much lower crystal surface area for any oil entrapment or any oil binding or liquid oil water entrapment properties. This second slide shows the effect of temperature. The buttermilk fraction, the high melting butter fraction in sunflower oil, when it is cooled from degree on the picture on the left and 0.1 degree on the right, you can immediately see the rapid drop in temperature, the bigger delta T's, and the flow rates and all that affects this has a much different crystal structure than one on the right. So one on the left when the structure than one on the right. So one on the left when the temperature drops very rapidly, which signifies a rapid loss of heat, you get much smaller crystals because that is the target. So combining this slide with the slide above, the role of the mechanical treatment and the temperature treatment gives you an idea that a rapid heat loss under high shear or compared to slow heat loss under very little to no shear has a huge difference in heat exchange. The moment that rate of heat exchange is affected, it immediately has an impact on the type of crystals you get. The moment you get a different type of crystal morphology or the structure, you're affecting its final physical structure, and that's going to give a different physical property. Like, for example, in this slide, if you consider that I want to bind some liquid oil, the picture on the left, if you start from the bottom, imagine some portion of liquid oil trying to move from, let me see if I change my laser pointer. Yeah. So if you want to start from this baseline and you want to come out, you will have to dodge a lot of physical barrier effects coming from the crystals to come out because there is no clean mean-free pathways, right? It's not clean. There are a lot of crystals that's going to prevent the liquid oil to come out or the emulsified water droplet to come out. But in this case, the liquid portion that wants to come out, it's got a free path. So anytime you want to trap a liquid oil, you want to have a much smaller structure, much finer crystal network. Another example could be that, if when we travel in a very crowded bus or a train, imagine you get up from the station and you are standing or you're sitting at the end of the bus, and then you get a lot of people coming on coming onto the bus. Some might get down, but it's getting very densely packed. And if you want to, when you have to get down to your own stop, you probably have to start a little early so you can manage to navigate through all the people standing and then get off the bus, right? But if there is hardly anybody standing, there is hardly any people on the bus, then it is very easy for you to come out. If the target is that you want to trap something inside that doesn't undergo a phase separation, leading to, let's say, emulsion breakdown, component migration, oiling out, whatever, you need to tightly pack it in. Right? So if we don't want you to get off from at a particular stop, you want to prevent it, then a lot of crystal packing has to happen. Imagine another thing. If you can visualize two glasses, one filled with marbles, these glass spheres that we used to play or use for decorations. Let's fill up one glass with those marbles, and on the other glass, let's take sand and fill it up. We can assume that both are silica material. Now, if you add, let's say, a 5 milliliter or 10 milliliter of water in the glass that contains a marble, and you do the same to the glass that's filled up with sand, visualize what do you expect to see. Well, anybody can anybody guess what's going to happen to the water that you add to the glass filled with marbles? Visually, what do you see happening to that water portion? Anybody? Any brave volunteers? Anybody there?
There, but I can't answer you.
At least people, okay. When you take that glass with marbles, that water, when you add, you will see it flowing straight down to the bottom of the glass. But when that glass filled up with sand, that water will not percolate all the way to the bottom. It will just wet top 1 centimeter or a few centimeters from that sand product, right? Now, so what happens? Just because in the marble, the surface area of those marbles are much less, it cannot trap the water. There is no chemical reaction, chemical bonding happening. It's just capillary action, right? But the one-on-one, the glass with the sand, there are so many sand particles with so much of surface area, it just traps the water, capillary action binds it, right? And it binds it, not only just binds it, what happens that if you take a finger and then if you want to write, if your name is Kakoli, you want to just write K on the top, you should easily be able to write K on that sand surface. What happens? What's happening is the pressure exerted from the tip of your finger, as it glides across the surface, it lines up your sand crystals in the way you're moving your finger. So there is enough mobility along with enough binding between that water and those sand particles that allows you to do that. So that the sand crystals move in the direction of your force and stays that way. But you cannot do that with the glass with the marble, right? Because it's just not going to move. You cannot write the initial of your name on that surface. So having a very small crystal structure that can trap a liquid oil gives you a physical structure that can move with an external pressure or stress. So whether you are making a margarine that you can spread, whether you want to make a peanut butter or any kind of Nutella type of products, anything that you need to spread, you need a different kind of network, right? Now, another important aspect is that let's take that glass with that sand. And if you keep on increasing water, you will soon reach a point where you will soon reach a point when you cannot play with that sand anymore. You cannot write anything on top of it. Why is that? Because the ratio between the solid fat crystals, or the amount the sand particles and water, has shifted. So there is not enough binding force between capillary forces, binding force, secondary forces between the solid part and the liquid to hold the structure. So if you want some kind of fluid behavior, you also have to be vigilant. What is the ratio of your hot stock structure forming components versus your liquid components? Many a times this goes wrong. Another interesting part with this, I'm dwelling a bit more on this because I'll refer back to this one. That now imagine if you are taking some marbles out and start putting it on the glass with sand, you exchange. You put some sand out, you put, let's say, equal mass of the marble in that. You will soon see that you are losing that effect of playing with that sand, making a castle or writing your name or whatever. So by transferring marbles into the glass of sand, you are destroying the uniformness or the homogeneity of this crystal size and its distribution. So once you have a disparity between the size, one big crystal, one small crystal, and this, it affects your structure. And that's going to affect the property you're looking for. How does that happen? Why in real life we can often see that marbles forming in the glass with sand? We'll come to that. So overall, the essence of the discussion so far is that we would like to have a nucleation dominant crystallization instead of a growth dominant crystallization. So with a faster driving force and a faster cooling rate, when you have a nucleation dominant crystallization, you get a glass full of sand. When you get a growth dominant crystallization, a lower rate of heat exchange and heat transfer and momentum mass transfer, you get a much bigger size of crystal. This is your glass with the marbles. So except there is one exception to this. All food products, the matrices, whatever we develop, we always go for the nucleation dominant crystallization, except one, and that is vegetable ghee. The moment we go into vegetable ghee kind of product, we need bigger structures. Because as consumers, I am used to pure desi ghee, which is butter fat that crystallizes as big grains. Now, if suddenly a company comes up with a no cholesterol, vegan, vegetarian, whatever tag we put on a vegetable mix of vegetable fats and oils, typically palm oil, palm stearin product, added with butter flavors. It smells like ghee. The color can be easily adjusted. It looks like ghee, but it does not have the structure. You need those grains, bigger crystal. Therefore, on those kind of structure phase transition, we do a growth dominant crystallization because it allows much slower heat exchange and you get much bigger crystals. For application of ghee, that's a mark of very good quality, right? So apart from that, everywhere else, we would go for a nucleation dominant crystallization. Now, interesting part, the next one that happens, that when we look at any fat that needs to be crystallized or anything that has to be added to crystallization, the melting point increases with the increasing carbon atoms in the chain length of the fatty acids. And it also changes based on the crystal polymorph. Not only that, when you have a triglyceride, from triglyceride, when that is converted to your diglyceride or to a monoglyceride, the melting point changes. The melting point increases as a function of the number of fatty acids on that glycerol backbone and the chain length and the extent of saturation. It's more all about crystal packing. So if we are starting from a palm oil or a fully hydrogenated palm oil or a fully hydrogenated palm stearin, fully hydrogenated rapeseed oil, the moment I'm converting that triglyceride into a diglyceride or a monoglyceride, I'm getting a component which much higher melting point. That's very important. Why? I'll tell you later. But this is a key slide that monoglycerides will have a higher melting point than diglycerides and higher melting point than triglycerides. And again, then on the picture on the right shows that in monoglycerides, that depending on its crystal forms, it also attains a different melting point because the more stable the thermodynamic stability it has in that crystal lattice, the more energy it takes to break, i.e. we find at a much higher melting point. We'll come to this later. Now, when we are adding emulsifiers to an oil to see it to develop the network, there are different mechanisms. In one case, when the emulsifier is not totally miscible in the fat systems, then they act sort of as impurities and can cause nucleation around it, cause a bit of secondary nucleation. And in this case, it can also affect the polymorphic shifts. So if you want to retard your polymorphic shift, then you need an emulsifier that's not perfectly miscible in a fat system. When they are completely miscible at a temperature, depend as a function of temperature or the type of fat, you can get different binary phase behaviors. When they are totally miscible in the solid state, that it can co-crystallize, it can form a template. So this is what we try to do in all kind of margarines or water in oil kind of systems. That I will show you some graphics that how emulsifiers, by crystallizing before the fat matrix at the king step of the crystal and the steps, affect crystallization, promoting faster crystal growth. Now, in an emulsion system, when you have two binary phases, two immiscible liquids, we can crystallize that high melting part of that emulsifier on the emulsion interface and promote more crystallization. Like, you might remember from day one that there was a sun diagram that, when you have, let's say, a distilled monoglyceride, where the hydroxyl part gets into the water droplets and the fatty acid tail, they hang around the surrounding fat systems. We can use those points for anchoring of the surrounding triglyceride melt to initiate crystallization. Typically this is like, if you melt some palm oil, put it in a beaker, and then put it on your table, in your office or in the lab, you will see it starts to crystallize from the surface of that container. You put in a glass rod, you will see it starts forming around the glass rod as well. Because as the heat loss is happening, I know it's a static condition, very slow heat loss. That's why you can see it happening. The heat, it starts from outside, outward, inward, right? From outside, inside, the temperature is dropping. And when you also have that anchoring side, it starts to crystallize from structures, from out to in. So imagine if you could have had some component inside that bulk of that beaker or a container or a tank, which provides the liquid crystals, the liquid clusters to kind of having an anchoring point, you promote much higher rate of secondary nucleation across the whole bulk. So suddenly you are crystallizing the whole melted product at small crystals, which will end up giving you a sand-like structure. Benefit, you get much smaller crystals, you get a large number of crystals, you get large number of crystal surface area for all kind of secondary interaction with the liquid component in that system. So emulsifier, then when it comes to the promotion, typically we would use high melting monoglycerides, mostly in case of water in oil emulsions. If it is oil in water, you probably go for a low melting monodiglycerides, because you don't want that oil membrane to be broken. So the different oil droplets can sort of form an agglomerate and then creaming happens. Now in ice cream production, what we do, that it is primarily more protein stabilized, but we want to dislodge that protein from the droplet interface into the serum part, the bulk part. And then as the emulsifier migrates from the droplet to the interface, there's a competition between the protein part, with dairy protein or eggs, what have we, and the emulsifier, that who rules the interface. Proteins often win. The emulsifiers would win, and they would dislodge that. And this is, in a sense, a destabilization. So that controlled destabilization is what people from the ice cream industry, that's what they want. But when it comes to a margarine industry, water and oil emulsifiers, we don't want that. That's a big red flag. So we want to stabilize it. Inhibition, typically, as we discussed the other day, the STS, polyglycerol esters, or 1,2,1,3 diglycerides, and also lecithin. Upalagi, you mentioned the effect of lecithin as an emulsifier. It can retard it. It can delay crystallization. If you're looking for crystal fat as one of your primary factors for stabilization. Now, STS, I'll show it in a schematic how STS or diglycerides can prevent this. Crystal modification, that emulsifiers, such as again STS, a diglyceride, or some alpha crystalline products, they can delay the transition from alpha to beta prime or beta prime to beta. Why do we need that or why do we don't need that depends on what kind of structure you are used, what kind of fats you have started with. Like, when you have a lot of symmetric triglycerides, a lot of SOS, POS, POP kind of structure, SAT, unsat, SAT configuration of the fatty acid on the triglycerides, they behave more similarly. So that means it will crystallize, melt in the same way and crystallize also in the same way, all together, giving away a very tiny, a very high amount of heat of crystallization between a narrow bandwidth of temperature. But when you induce more asymmetry in the triglyceride, you take palm stearine, palm oil, rapeseed oil, industrial fats, and coconut oil, the chain length distribution of the chain length of the fatty acids in the triglycerides, the saturated, unsaturated distribution of triglycerides is very asymmetric, and there is no predominance of certain type of triglyceride to drive it into a very sharp melting, sharp crystallization behavior. That means you have induced enough chaos in that mix that there is a much more time spent in the beta prime form than beta. And that has its different properties. Anytime you want a product to be distilled that can distort, form, laminate, flex, bend, you need much more asymmetric kind of triglycerides because they would form more stable beta prime crystals rather than beta. When you go into any, let's say, if you go into, let's say, the Coffee Cafe Day or all the fantastic so the coffee shops we have all over the world, a lot in India, in fact. When you order a cappuccino or a coffee, you often get a small piece of dark chocolate with it. If you take that piece of chocolate in your hand, if you let go on the table, you will hear it land. You can snap between your fingers, you will hear it break. But if you just hold it between your fingers, it melts very fast. Don't try to put it in your short pocket. I've tried that, bad idea. So when it snaps, what happens? That is very hard. But when it's between your fingers, rapid heat exchange between your fingers and that layer of chocolate, that beta crystal stable symmetric chocolate fats, it melts very fast, right? So you are not able to spread it. Either it snaps or it loses its structure. But if you have typical, say, if you buy a margarine from your supermarket, I think Amul and Zydas, they all make different kinds of these margarines. It's quite a solid, but you can spread it because the fat crystals, they are primarily in the beta prime form, trapping enough liquid oil inside and a bit of water, of course, that allows it to move under stress. So if you start making a crystal structure that you want to move, that you want to have some kind of flow under external pressure, you cannot start with beta-tending fats. High melting, fast melting beta-tending fats like confectionery fats or butter blends at times. But sometimes a highly intensified structure, lipids have that kind of tendency. If you get a beta structure, you can't. So maybe you need to have a delay in that transformation from beta prime to beta, because when you are crystallizing, it will go from alpha to beta prime to beta across various subforms. But you want to consume that food in a particular type of crystal structure. Then we can also manipulate that by emulsifying. So we are forming a structure, we are forming that for a food or liquids or an emulsion, but I want it to be in the beta prime. So starting from the fat, starting from the processing, and adding emulsifier, we can delay those crystal transitions. Now this is an example. Actually, this is the published paper from Suprati showing that high melting monostearates, glycerol monostearates, we have from originated rapeseed. He might have got the sample from us actually. That when that emulsifier, its place has migrated onto the droplet. The water part has gone in and the fatty acid crystal is standing on the side. As that cools down, it forms that anchoring point for other triglycerides to set. So when you have a lot of these water droplets across the entire matrix of melted triglycerides, you suddenly have points where crystallization can happen at the interface. So this is typically an example how Pickering stabilization, we can work with Pickering stabilization to initiate this kind of secondary nucleation from inside the bulk of an emulsion. Now, the success of this kind of stabilization depends also a lot on the annular space we were talking about. Because the size of the droplet, the internal phase, what we discussed on Tuesday, the formation of the droplets, the size distribution and the density and their kinetic mobility, the kinetic stability of those droplets, they also determine the triglycerides that are forming on the interface, how stable they are. Because at this stage, we have crossed over the management stage, now we're doing structure management. So if your mechanical treatment is too violent, too harsh, then it's going to break down the structure. We'll come to that depending on what kind of fluidity we need, we would at times deliberately break down those bonds because we want a product with a different fluidity at that time. But if you don't want it to be completely broken, you have to manipulate your mechanical shearing to build the structure and hold it there. A quick schematic kind of an animation to see how emulsifiers can promote crystallization. So when we consider crystallization of fats happening as a step and king, that it starts and there's kind of a king and then another step, based on the different triglycerides, crystalline fat with triglycerides will crystallize at different temperatures, right? So therefore, oils and fats, they don't have typically, a fat does not have a melting point, it has a melting range. So we make use of that principle of melting range and start crystallizing. So the triglyceride with the highest melting point coming out of its fatty acid composition will crystallize fast, followed by the ones that have lower melting point. So let's see if this animation works. So let's say one crystal star, one fat comes and sits in that step. Then an emulsifier comes and sits in the step. Mind you, that emulsifier, if it was a monoglyceride, the slide we saw before, has a much higher melting point. So as the system cools down, that monoglyceride will crystallize before the triglyceride matrix and can start sit on the step. And the next set of triglyceride come and pack around it. What might also happen, that emulsifiers with those high melting point, they will crystallize before the fat matrix, and then the formation of a step happens around it. So by including a material that has a higher melting point compared to the full triglyceride mix, helps you create these anchoring sites, whether it's in a bulk in an anhydrous system or at the interface in an emulsion system. So this is how an emulsifier would promote the creation of step and king when fat crystallization happens from a liquid to the solid phase transition. What might also happen? It might also retard. How? If the emulsifier starts sitting on the cake, depending on its structure, depending how it co-crystallizes with the triglyceride molecules, it can prevent the absorption of the next solute, the next triglyceride that's trying to come in. For a given force, that fat is trying to sit in that kink or the step, but suddenly something else is occupying it. So it cannot sit, it has to fight with it. Right? Now, that way, it can retard your crystallization. So it delays your crystallization, but give enough time and temperature, or you do not have enough lower temperature, you need more time. If you had higher temperature, you might need less time. But when this retardation starts happening, you will have delayed crystallization process. So you might not see it because we still see the bulk. There will be pockets of uncrystallized fat in your matrix which has not crystallized but will undergo what we call post-crystallization or coarsening, and you see it in the very initial slides, and it will have a different kind of structure. I'm sure in industry or even at lab scale, when you work with palm oil, is notorious for slow crystallization. Why is that? One of the factors is that the alpha crystals, the shelf life or the active life for the alpha crystal is longer for palm oil, and it has got a lot of diglycerides that act as crystal inhibitor. 1,2,1,3 diglycerides, when they're present in palm oil, when they look a little like triglyceride, but they can sit in between and prevent your crystal packing. So a retardation can happen when it starts to affect the cluster formation showing is declustering effect. But if the chain length is long enough, saturation is higher enough for the emulsifier or crystal promoter that you have added, it starts to make a template. I'll give you another example. Like, when you are, imagine you're driving into a parking lot of, say, a supermarket, any big supermarket or a movie theater or Cinemax, IMAX, what have we. What helps a driver to park the car? I'm sure if I was probably face to face, I would have identified brave volunteers to answer. But if you imagine that you are driving, the movie starts at, let's say, 10 o'clock in the morning, you have gone there at 8:30. And if you are one of the first ones to come into the empty parking lot, you will see there are white lines on the parking lot that guides you to go inside two parallel lines and park equidistant as much as possible between your neighboring cars. So once that parking lot gets filled up by the cars coming in, every driver would make use of those white lines to form a template of a completely filled parking lot. Imagine those white lines as these emulsifiers. Those white lines were in the parking lot before you were driving in. So these emulsifiers had already made a template for the fat crystals that coming in to set for them to make that template arranged format. Now, when you are driving, okay, so that white lines help. You can't put your car in, you look from the left, you look on the right to see how close you are to the neighboring cars. Now imagine if the length of that white line, or the sequence of series of white lines, if they're only a couple of feet compared to, let's say, 2.5 meters or whatever is the standard length, you will not be able to see beyond a certain point. Now, taking this back to emulsifier analogy, if the chain length of that emulsifier is much shorter, then you do not have a pronounced templating effect. So if you have a long chain, short chain kind of blend, that's not going to be as efficient as the fatty acid chain length of the emulsifier. Which means that typically when most of our fats and oils that we work with, we have got a whole, basically C16, C18, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? And you've got some C12, so very little C10, C8. So once you have all the vegetable fats dominated by 16, 18, 18, 1, 18, 2, 18, 3, the mono and the polyunsats can become all 18, 0 when it's fully hydrogenated. You need something, you need an emulsifier with a longer chain length to induce this kind of setting templating mechanism. So in case people often say that, yeah, you can add, if you fully hydrogenate rapeseed oil or soybean oil, you get 85-90% of stearic acid. And you can add that as structuring product. Yes, you can. But at times you also need much longer fatty acid, behenic, arachidic or C22 behenic fatty acid based emulsifiers to promote this rapid kind of crystallization. If not, if your crystal promoter has the same kind of chain length compared to your triglyceride that you're trying to form, it's not going to work that well. So coming back to the parking lot, imagine you're trying to drive in and then the guys come in and start painting the lines. It's going to be chaotic. So you need the lines well drawn, dried before you drive in. So you need that emulsifier already set, making the template for the triglycerides to come in sequence. So you get a much layered, structured product. Once you get that, you get a much homogeneous structure, much uniform crystal structure you're forming. That can then later be subjected to various kinds of shear or stress or force or what have you. If you don't have that, if the declustering happens, then you've got some portion of your fat matrix that is not crystallized properly. So what it will do, now that the portion is liquid, it's surrounded by some other solid neighboring fat crystals, it will simply latch on to the neighboring crystal, increasing the size of that neighbor. So and when that happens, this is similar to that when you're taking away some sand and adding a marble into that, from the glass filled with marbles to the glass filled with sand. What could have been small fine crystal? Suddenly, imagine some of the sand is getting lumped, pressed into a marble, and then existing in that surrounding system of sand, there is a huge mismatch of product's texture, right? Again, coming back to the parking lot, imagine when you're driving in, when you have parked your car and you want to drive out. Now you have, let's say the movie is over, you back into the parking lot, and then suddenly you see a few school buses have somehow managed to park in the same parking lot. If it's an open one, probably one can do it. So when that size of the school bus is 2.5 to 3 times of your car, of your normal personal sedans, it's disturbing the whole packing of the parking lot. When you're going to drive one, probably it will be difficult for you to find your car. When you're driving out, when you're pushing backwards or rolling out nose in front, you might not be able to see what's coming from behind the bus, right? So the size of the crystal, the size of the vehicles parked in a parking lot has a huge impact on the homogeneity of the whole system. Now, when in parking lots where buses are parked, it's no problem, right? Everything is at everything has got a huge length. So everything is a school bus or a public bus, so no issues. But if you start parking small cars in between, then that problem arises. So the formation of the crystals with a certain size always has an effect on the final crystal structure and also then again on your final properties. Everybody awake? Anybody awake? Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Everybody awake. Don't worry. Please carry on your very beautiful lecture. We are all attending to your lecture.
So next time, the take-home message is, next time you drive into a parking lot, you think yourself as a fat crystal and the lines as emulsifiers that is helping you to park your car.
Really, it's a very beautiful comparison we have made to make us understand how these crystals affect the structure. Okay, please carry on.
Now, as I was mentioning, the diglycerides, that 1,3 or 1,2, they have 2 fatty acids compared to 1 in the monoglyceride. They sort of impose themselves sometimes as triglycerides, and they can start sitting at the king state of this crystallization matrix, and they would block solutes. So when we have this, then you also need to negate this and add some more crystal promoters to or increase the driving force. Maybe pass it the flow rate. In the equation that I showed, there was also the effect of flow rate, because flow rate impacts the time of residence against that cold surface, the time of exposure to the mechanical shear, and that has a direct impact on the rate of heat exchange of those molecules. So therefore, in the practical world, whenever I hear using of palmolene in a product that has a solid structure as a food component at the end, I'm not at all fond of it. Typically, palmolene 56 or higher IVs can have anywhere between 6, 7, 8, 9, 11% diglycerides, and that will slow down your crystallization. You cannot just always hit any product at -20 to overcome this. So when the diglycerides sit in, they prevent the blocking, and then the liquid part that could not crystallize, could not get into that network of packed crystals. Since it is getting delayed, the heat of crystallization coming from that portion of liquid triglycerides or partially crystallized triglyceride, that heat does not get dissipated in the same rate at the same time as others. So when that heat is coming out, that will impact the physical state of other crystals, whether it's affecting the crystal transformation or affecting slowing down the network formation. It can affect the rate of diffusion of the liquid oil into those crystal matrices. Because for a crystal to grow its surface, it has to get rid of the crystals or the latent heat of crystallization. So removal of that heat not only is important from the whole matrix, you have to ensure as much as that is done at the packing point. Now, folks, I can't see you, but I think, can you see me for just putting my hands together? Like we say namaste, can you see me?
Yeah.
Yes, you can see me.
We can see.
We can see.
Yeah. If you can see me, I would urge all of you to do this and then rub your hands. Just rub your hands for few seconds and hold it together. Go on. So if you rub your hands, you realize the frictional heat causes the temperature of your surface rise. So when you're keeping your palms together, your hands stay warm. The moment you take it apart, you've got a cooling medium, you've got a medium in between, at a lower temperature than your hand, the air of the room. And you can feel your surface of your palm is cooling down, right? Now if you blow between your hands, you will see it's cooling down faster. So what happens? The flow rate of your cooling medium, as it moves by and a new colder portion, more colder sections comes in, it removes the heat from the surface, right? So the effect of the medium, the temperature of the cooling medium, the rate at which it flows has a huge impact. Another example could be that if you're trying to do a melting, if you hold an ice cube between your fingertips, is what will happen? The ice, you will see the ice melting pretty fast, and the tip of your finger is getting cold because of that heat exchange, right? It's taking away the heat from your fingers and melting it. Now, if you want to melt it faster, you will probably grasp it in your fist, make a fist, put the ice cube in between, the surrounded melts faster. If you want to do even more, then you can rub your hands, make it warm, and then hold it. So you are affecting the delta T and also the surface of exposure between the one that wants to lose heat and the one that wants to gain heat, depending whichever you want to do. If you're trying to reduce the heat, you have to also expose it to a larger surface area, so that heat loss happens very fast. If it does not happen very fast, you're forming a network of some crystal that has lost the fat, is very happy, but is also trapping some portion that has yet to crystallize. And that will undergo oswald ripening, go through post-crystallization. So instead of having a lot of sand, you're ending up with marbles. And that's not always optimal. You can measure this. Once you have, as you start cooling down, you can measure the temperature of the product emulsion slowly cooling down. And once at your packing temperature, they said, okay, you know what, at this 15 degrees centigrade, I'll stop the cooling regime. And if you put a thermometer in that matrix, if you've taken it out, you've removed it from the cold environment, so it's completely static and starts a thermal environment. If you put a thermometer in, if you see that there's a rise of the mercury, the temperature of the product is rising, it is a clear giveaway that heat of crystallization coming from inside the margarine is affecting the temperature rise. Now, some amount of temperature is inevitable, whether you get from 0.3, 0.4 or 0.5 degree in 1, 3, 5 minutes increment, or you're getting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees. That depends on how much uncrystallized fat you already have inside. You don't want to have probably more than 2 degree rise for a well crystalline set matrix structured product. If you have that, then we have to go back to the drawing board, look into the chemical composition, look into the mechanical temperature treatment, and they look still fine. You cannot probably change the mechanical or the temperature treatment. Then what you need some of those emulsifiers which will promote crystallization. In its natural state, in a natural blend of all different asymmetric triglycerides, it's not enough for them to crystallize given your the type of cooling and shear mechanisms or the equipment you have. So you add emulsifiers that forms those matrices, that forms those white lines, so it all crystallizes as best as possible. Now, question might arise, what happens after this? What happens during the tempering or the maturation stage? You will very, very often hear the tempering. Yes, the tempering state is also allowing the crystal network to set and the liquid oil, the liquid components to diffuse in. So what is important, at any point you are packing a crystallized product, that temperature should not deviate by plus minus 2 degrees to your storage temperature. Because if you're putting it down immediately at a very low temperature, then suddenly you're stopping that you give it a much bigger cold shock, and the network formation can get affected. If that can get affected, at the same time, the rate of oil at which liquid oil is trying to get in, the viscosity of oil will be less at 5 degrees compared to 20 degrees. So at those nanometer micron levels, if that liquid oil has not gone in as deep as it should have been, if the network is not homogeneous, robust enough to trap that oil, if that rate of diffusion and rate of formation is affected, then you've got a product that is not stable enough for downstream applications. So maturation of those crystals, maturation of the network, formation of that network, any polymorphic shift that is happening, any heat of crystallization that is coming out, they all need to settle down. So crystallization often for me is like holding a pendulum and allowing it to move. You like it to at the packing point, it's not done. It moves, sort of crosses the line, then sort of comes back. Something is crystalline, something is changing its polymorphic shape, something is happening, and it tends to settle down. Typically 48 hours, depending on how much solid fat you have. Now the question that comes in at this point, that how do you determine how much tempering you need for stabilization of that structured matrix? It depends a lot on what kind of fat you have used, what kind of, how much liquid oil you have used, the amount of diglycerides you have, and then when it's an emulsion, how much internal phase do you have? Do you have something at the interface surface that can promote crystallization? Do you have anything that can retard that clustering? Have you had too much of mechanical shear at that rear end of your downstream process that you've broken down some of the structures? So depending on a lot of these factors, one can see, you can do some trials. Often it's done trial and error, depending on the packing point and the heat of crystallization, the polymorphic behavior of the fats, that how long do I need? I always believe that you need at least 48 hours for a crystalline matrix to stabilize. Now, very often what happens, if you are keeping the product in an industrial scale, if you're keeping it a packed product, package after package, like a brick wall, or you're stacking them up, the ones at the bottom, they're experiencing pressure from the top, and it is more at the center. It cannot also get rid of any heat of crystallization that is still left inside. It cannot flow out. So that heat causes oiling out. Why does it cause oiling out? Because the rate of diffusion of the oil again is not complete. The crystal network has not formed, so it has found some gap in that network so it can flow out. It flows to the side because the pressure is much more negative on the side, so it will flow out to the side. And I always visualize this as a river flowing through a land and is joined by its tributaries and distributaries. Once one of those channels is forming, it can draw out any connection it has with the liquid oil. It's like it draws into it, forming a tributary distributaries of a liquid. It comes out to the surface and goes out. It can draw your water droplets out. So when you have liquid water coming out for various reasons, it is not thick enough, its rheology is not high enough, or there is no rheology, or there is not enough small particles, if it's bigger in size, once it starts to coalesce and form bigger portion, as it starts to go to the surface of lower pressure, it will drag things along with it. So it can cause to oiling out can cause watering out, watering oil can often cause oiling out. So any movement of those liquid components in that solid liquid blend can happen if that network formation is not optimal, the diffusion is not correct. So one thing we have tried to do here, that I think we are lucky to have plenty of fancy equipment that I designed with another colleague of mine, surface reflectance. So if you get a crystallized matrix, if you take images, cameras never lie. And if I'm looking fatter and fatter over the day, I don't think it's a problem with my iPhone. It's probably me enjoying more ice creams, right? So a camera never lies. So if it can take a picture of at a different wavelength of light of the surface, and after time as a function of time temperature, we keep on taking pictures at different wavelengths. If you see the surface reflectance is increasing, one can probably assume that some form of liquid monolayer has formed on the surface that is giving more gloss or shine, so reflecting the surface reflectance. So by studying the deviation or change in surface reflectance and the gloss or shine of the product, you want to shine it. And is that a ringtone or me thinking loudly? Or is it somebody you want me to stop?
No.
No, I think one got unused it.
Okay. Well, at least it's much better than a cock-a-doodle-doo, right? Not the sound of a chicken at rooster at 4 o'clock in the morning. That would have been hilarious. And so by studying surface reflectance, you can find out that if any oil migration is happening or not, or it's doing a lot of viscosity studies. I'll come to that. This is an NMR study we did in collaboration, that if you have palm oil measuring the solid fat content as function of temperature, we can enzymatically treat it to remove the diglycerides, or we can add some diglycerides or make very pure diglycerides into it. And the more diglyceride it has, you see the solid fat content at a given temperature is much lower. So when you have the red, where we added, when you have removed the enzymatic means, it's got much more solid packing, giving a higher NMR at all different temperatures. But then if you add to it more diglycerides, you will see the green line having showing much less solid fat. Now, over a period of time, it will come down to it will oxalate at its beta state, thermodynamically stable state. But that point, that time, might be far beyond which you want to study it, or it's beyond the shelf life. So it's going to affect your crystal structure. Now, you heard me talking about alpha, beta prime, and beta, and all that. Now, the reason we like different crystal polymers for different application is because of its crystal structure. So when you have alpha, just in the very early part, it will shift to your beta prime. When you have beta prime, it's much more needle shaped. It has a much bigger surface area, and it can trap more liquid. The moment it can trap liquid portions, you're building in a structure, you're importing structure to a liquid dominance format, which again, as I mentioned, has some kind of mobility, fluidity, based on any kind of deformity force you expose that system to. But when it goes into the beta form, it loses that kind of structure. As crystals should pack differently, have a bone rotation into more form 6 in cocoa butters, the beta prime form, it loses that needle-like structure and it cannot trap away. So either the liquid portions can be released, or if there is not much of a liquid component, it will still not be flexible enough to move under any deformity force. I think before we move into monoglycerides, how we can use it pro crystallizers, let me see if I can show you a video. Let me have a quick look. Well, can anybody see a video moving?
Yes.
Okay, so let me start again. So this is a trilaurin system, triloric fat, a triple L system, crystallizing under static conditions, and the structure is being looked at by microbeam X-rays. And this is a typical beta prime crystal. You can see how fine the structure network is forming, and this individual, you might almost see the individual layers of crystals forming. Right? This is the beta prime structure, and I got this from Professor Sato from University of Hiroshima. So this is one. Okay, you could see everybody, right? The prime, and if you look at, so starting from that beta prime structure over time, you will see as it moves into a beta state how the structure is completely destroyed. So these white bits you see is actually
how is it photographed?
This is done by microbeam X-rays. Microbeam X-ray, yeah, cameras, and with passing microbeam X-rays, you can capture different these kind of things.
Wow. So you put it under a microscope, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I think mostly you can do
it. You have to put it under a microscope, and the camera can be attached to the microscope.
You can, but you need a very high resolution to look into those nanoscale crystal structures. In principle, you can. You need a very high resolution. Yeah, so I think if your instrument is sharp enough to look into such small nanoscales, you can obviously see it. Now, what we see here is that once the structure changes into a different crystal polymorph, it's not going to have give you the same physical property. So if we want this to happen, great. If we don't want this to happen, we have to delay it. So again, coming back, that how do you promote more beta primes, starting from your choice of fats and oils in B. I'm glad this at least worked out. So coming back to, let's say it's using of motorides and pro-crystallizers. Well, last time we discussed that based on the oil where we to make that motoride, if it's flinty or soybean, sunflower is stearic acid dominate, monostearate. If it's sunflower, it's oleates and oleates or monoaldehydes. Rule of thumb is that if you depend on the source of cereal, fully hydro palm, canola palm, partially hydro and blends, of course the iron value would increase and the melting point would decrease. It's the similar effect. If you have got a high fat system with small internal phase system, meaning high fat, low moisture water system, principally you can use any of them. But if you reduce your fat content and you increase your water moisture content, which still the higher portion being internal phase, I think I can call it internal. You need to reduce hardness. One, otherwise that emulsifier is on the interface, so that emulsion system compared to high fat to low fat, and actually you have very little solid fat as well to induce the crystal network. Because when you're reducing your fat, you want to avoid fat sintering. So the hard stock to liquid oil ratio also has to shift to accommodate more and more of the water inside. So you don't actually need interfacial rheology or interfacial promotion of crystallization. But when you have a lot of solid fat to crystallize, you would go for much high melting emulsifiers to promote that. This is more like a real life problem. So in your case, what is very important, the moment you are trying to make any emulsion on your lab, you look at your components. How much of that emulsion system is crystalline fat? Is it all liquid oil and water? If that's the case, you should not be using any emulsifier that needs melting. Something that is pasty at room temperature is the one you're going to use, whether it's immaterial of the HLB values. Otherwise, you will always get emulsion instability. In fact, you can get emulsion inversion. You take oil and add water and you shear and you cool down. But one of the principles in such water in oil stabilization is the viscosity of the continuous phase has to be lower than the viscosity of the internal phase during the emulsion tank. So if oil is not melted enough, it's getting harder, then suddenly that starts to agglomerate and break up under the shear, and it becomes small portions and water goes in between. So it flips into an oil in water emulsion. So to prevent that, you don't want to have any surface crystallization or any kind of recurring stabilization emulsion tank. That will come later. So anytime you get emulsion instability, you have to look at how much liquid oil you have, how much structuring fat you are trying to crystallize, and how much moisture you have. And how effective is your heat exchange medium, also as a function of your shear. So once you have to get this matrix sorted to know that I can keep my internal phase as internal phase. Now, Pupalagi was mentioning about lecithin. When you have a little bit of solid fat, that one that you want to keep, that one you want to solidify, crystallize to keep all the liquid in, if there is a delay in the crystallization, the liquid portions can coalesce and give you more instability. If the network is not formed correct, we'll see soon, the heavier water portion can just settle down under gravity. We'll follow Stokes' law, the rate of sedimentation will go to the power of 2, and you've got a very fast separation. And you cannot always just shear it back to get into a more initial starting point. You can't. We measure a lot of rate of crystallization behavior using NMR. Like if you take in this case, if a non-trans filling fat, you melt everything at 90 degrees. So it's increasing the rate of crystallization, and the moment the rate of crystallization increases, you always get smaller crystal. So at the end, when it sort of stabilizes, it's tempered, getting stabilized, you will get very similar solid fat. because this crystallizer or the crystal promoter, they're almost 100% solid. It's hardly any liquid component in that, adding value to melting point anywhere between 70 to 85 degrees. So that will add a small percent to that SFC, but it dramatically increases its rate of nucleation. So once you get again that kind of product, as we have discussed earlier, you get a final structure with much more flexibility, plasticity, ability to laminate, ability to wick, ability to spread on bread, ability to trap liquid components. We have seen time and time again that when we take any bakery fat, use some high melting fat emulsifier blends, we might not always see a difference as it comes out. We might see some difference measuring texture analyzer or panageometers and all. But you cannot measure plasticity that easy. But then if you're putting it in a lamination, you're alternating layering it between those to make kind of a croissant or a puffed up curry kind of product, you will see the lift is much better, much more uniform for a fat matrix that has crystallized better. When you go into a production line, there are more telltale signs to suggest how crystallization is happening. How is it faster? So once you get a lift between any dough-raised product, like a croissant, for example, if you cross-section it, like a cross-section, you will see multi-layers. That starts from laminating the dough and the fat into millimeter levels, having 150, 200, lots of different alternate layers of the fat system and the dough. So in the oven, the moisture from the dough and the margarine, as that goes into steam, it pushes the fat out. The fat acts as a barrier, tries to hold it. The steam tries to push out. The more uniform is that barrier effect from your fat matrix, the bigger is the portion, higher is the lift of the product, the bigger is the volume. So everything remaining the same, I would enjoy that more something compared to something that looks very dense. They might all start from the same amount of dough, but the final structure is much different, because once you have an alternate layer of a fat crystal network, you get a better lift. Okay, how do you get that fat crystal network? You need to get a fat crystal network that is flexible. How do you get that flexibility? You get that flexibility by inducing more smaller crystals. How do you get those smaller crystals? By inducing much faster nucleation. So if it does not happen naturally with the parent oil mix, we put in some emulsifiers that crystallizes before the fat mix, forming the template, forming small crystals. So guys, you can see, do you see me holding my fists together? Can you see me? Right? Hello?
Yes, we can see you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can.
So everybody, if you just make face and put them together, once you have them in contact, how many motions can you make with your face without breaking contact? If I follow what I say, I'm moving it this way, I cannot move it across this way, because then immediately I'm breaking the network. I don't have contact, right? But if I put my fingertips together and I want to make all different forms of movement, I can do plenty of things, right? Meaning, now imagine the tip of my fingers as the small crystals that has formed a network compared to a network formed by bigger crystals. The moment you have bigger crystals, the point of connections, the nodal points, is so little that it does not stretch, it breaks. So if you want the flexibility again from any network, lamination, for spreading, you have to start from those fingertips, that sort of thing. You can see a lot of space between my fingers, right? So I can hold I can hold my bottle of water here, right? I can in principle hold it. But if I hold it like this, let me try, it's going to be very unstable. Anytime, anybody can use the tiniest amount of force to take the bottle out of my hand. But if I grab it like this, it's going to take you more force to wrench it out of my fingers, right? So once you have, again, the small crystal packing, entrapment liquid oil, it's a much more stable system. Measurement of viscosity. How do we know that you're getting much more smaller crystals? When you have crystalline fat mix, a triglyceride mix with component that crystallizes at different ways, as you cool down in the rheometer under a given constant shear, constant strain with a temperature gradient, you will see as the crystals viscosity, as the liquid crystals become solid, crystallization happens, the viscosity goes up. So in this case, shear rate cooling down to 10 degrees per minute, shear rate of 10 per second in palm oil. You add high melting ingredients. Mind you, this one is a C22 carbon atom chain length. Remember, we discussed the length, the effect of the importance of the length of that white line. So when it's much longer chain length, crystallizing before, it helps the palm oil to have more crystals, and we can pick it up from viscosity. The measuring rheology, we can pick up, its viscosity is increasing. So at any given point of time or temperature in production or if post-production, we can see that you get much more crystals forming because the viscosity has gone up. And we also see it in many downstream actual food preparations. And this is again the onset of crystallization, the point of inflection when its fat goes up very fast. Trans fat or non-trans, adding variety of different crystal promoters, we can get different rates. The question often comes that in the other day we discussed which emulsifier do I need, which is the best emulsifier. Every emulsifier is the best depending on what kind of emulsion system, what kind of property you want to have from it. Same here, what kind of crystal promoter is the best depends on what kind of system you have. Because to mind you one as well, that when you have a very high melting component, even if you're adding it at as low as 1%, when that crystallizes, it still gives out a very sharp peak of heat of crystallization. So we also have to be aware that as it promotes more crystallization, more heat of crystallization has to come out, which means that we have to take that heat out. We have to dissipate that latent heat of crystallization. If we don't, it stays in the system, melts some of the crystal that has formed, shifting it back to more liquid, semi-liquid state, and that will crystallize over time and it forms marbles. So it does not have an adverse effect on that closed system, building structure, and it's not delaying it. So again, as I've mentioned multiple times, the diffusion of the liquid oil, this doesn't get delayed. That's the whole beauty of it. So that's studying the whole process, starting from your composition, what kind of mechanical treatment, what kind of temperature treatment you have in hand. We make the best of it to get the best physical structure that gives the physical property we want to look at. This is again looking at the DSC curves that it's the lamination margarine pure fat. If that starts to crystallize at 24.6, we're adding palm-based, by adding 1%, you can increase by 1 degrees. If you use more behenic based, you can increase by 10 degrees, and then adding 2%. Let's get back to the point. I don't know why I keep losing it. So when you add more and more emulsifiers, you can induce higher onset of crystallization behavior, but you might not be needing it, because we have seen that when you add, say, 1, 2, 3% of very high melting component, you see you get a kind of a shoulder effect. So either in the rate of nucleation studies with NMR or DSCs or in rheology, you suddenly get a rise, and then it plateaus out, and then continues, and then it rises. So that what it signifies, the high melting component is either added to in much higher dosage or too high melting point. So it just forms such a shoulder that's not actually helping you in any way. So maybe on the contrary, if the heat of crystallization is not removed, as I've mentioned, around 40% dye and 20% unreacted oil, those kind of components, it prevents the shift of crystal polymorphs. I try to make margarine with only 10% solid fat, liquid oil, and water compared, and instead of, if I did not have any hydrogenated solid fat, that crystal lattice with high amount of diglycerol, it stays in alpha form for a much longer period compared to when I add a fully hydrogenated fat emulsifier blend that goes into beta prime beta. The longer it stays, the nature of study we will do. So there's always an optimal structure. So which is best, which is not good, which is, I don't want to hear about it. It all depends what you want to do, what food product you want to make. Right? If you are talking about, let's say it's table margarine, straight from the fridge, a table margarine or a low-fat spray, one of the most important deliverables is its ability to spread. Right? If it doesn't spread, we don't like it. Now, if you try to spread butter from the fridge, you just take out Amul butter, you spread, it's not going to spread, it's brittle. it starts spreading after some time because it melts. The low melting fractions melt very fast, and then it melts, and then the solid components glide or slide over your melted triglycerides, and you have a nice layer on your bread. But if you take, I don't know if there is any product in the market in India where you also have some amount of butter and liquid oil, or even, let's say, in other case, the margarine. You have solid fat, you have some liquid oil crystallized in such a way that the solid part can glide over. If you keep it outside, it will also melt because you're actually melting so typically the industrial fat and the oleic fat that's inside. So, but then if you want a baking fat at home, you want to bake some cake, you can go out and buy some baking fat. That will be much harder because you're not doing it just by hand gently. You're putting it in some kind of a KitchenAid mixing whipping system that exerts much more pressure. Industrially, depending on the temperature of the bakery, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, they can keep it at 16 degrees, or in Scandinavia till late 18, 19s, or India, Brazil, so some other places where it can be as high as 35. We have to have the structure differently, that what is scoopable in one country will not be scoopable in another country. Anything that is scoopable in a colder temperate part of the world, that will be completely liquid in Indonesia. What in Vietnam, Philippines, and Malaysia is much more scoopable fat will solidify at other part of the world where it's much more temperate. So what kind of structure is best? There is no direct answer. So what is optimal? What do you want from that structure? So based on that, you select a system, add emulsifiers, go through the heat exchange process, maintain the texture, temperate, and there you are attaining something that you want to work with. So far, most of the talk I had focused on. So far, I'm sure you realize that when we are talking about structure, I'm talking about a crystal, well-coordinated, well-templated crystal fat forming a network. So when it's pure liquid oil, I don't have that luxury of having a separate fat and system. What I will do, I will use that emulsifier, the high melting component, to build the structure. Beforehand, I probably use only 0.2, 0.3 to make an emulsion. If I want more out of the structure, I would add 0.5 or 1.1%, 1.5 max. But here, I will treat that emulsifier as the crystallizing fat, as the structuring fat, as the stabilizing fat. So that would lead me to this kind of a liquid thing. That this was the study we did for Middle East. So we had 92% liquid oil, but I can easily remove the olein and the IE and add, let's say, about 3% of a high melting fat and emulsifier combination. So in this liquid oils, liquid emulsion, we have some skim milk powder, some salt, some sorbet. We also added some whipping emulsifiers, as we spoke the other day, the twins, the lactane PGEs. I can easily just take this out, keep only 3% the emulsified component, for that we make the structure, all liquid oil, some water, some salt for these kind of liquid things. But before we go into this, I'm sure, why do we need this structuring fat? Okay, first thing is, okay, if I want to make a liquid shortening, can I just use palm oil or palm stearine? In principle, yes. But what might also happen, that when you have a pure liquid component as your primary, let's say, carrier or solvent, the solid crystals where you form, mind you, which are typically C16, C18, and 18 should be there if you're talking palm oil, they do not have that kind of a network forming capacity. And over time, you can see that structure collapsing because they can just auto-fraction it out. So you need much high melting components, ideally with chain length more than 18 carbon, to form that network, right? To hold things together. Like if you have 20% water, the liquid margarine for frying, I know many companies in India have been trying to make that. So if you want to suspend 20% of water in a structured liquid oil, but mind you, when we talk about liquid emulsion, liquid shortening, one of the deliverables is the liquid characteristic. That it has to flow from its original container without any kind of induced force. It will just flow out. You don't have to shake it up. For that flow, you need to have, again, a ratio of your water to its liquid oil. I think we discussed in the first lecture the ratio of internal phase. Hello?
ये तो बोलता जा रहा है 7 से 8 टाइम जिसका लेक्चर है तो मैं काट दिया लाइन उसकी तो बोला क्या
Well, I think there are some observations about the length.
7 से 8 टाइम का 9:15 बजा दिए अभी
No, I'm so sorry because I'm so sorry because I got the impression that the day one that I continue.
टेबल पे रख अब बोल तू क्या करना
No worries, I can summarize it
Can
later.
you please
मैडम
mute
अगर मैं टाइम ऐसा हो रहा है
Miss Manchanda ji?
मैं खाना शाम को 5-6 बजे तक मैं खाना
Abhi, please mute Manchanda ji.
उसके बाद ब्रेड खा ली और खाने के लिए भी जगह नहीं है एक आध रोटी जो है उसमें जो रखी है खाई जाएगी
Abhi, please mute Manchanda ji.
Yes, I'm trying. Just one.
Well, my apologies.
It's okay.
My
Please
apologies.
carry on.
Well, I don't see the slip in front, and I got that sort of the license day one. Then now you go through the slides, and since I didn't have any objection, I did
it's
play the
I
slide.
think I have removed him. Why I have removed him?
Oh, I
This is
feel
an
bad.
interesting lecture. I think Kaustuv, you should carry on. We are all interestingly hearing to it. If one person is not interested in both, please carry on.
Okay, let me see if I'm sharing now. Can you see my screen? No.
No, we cannot see your screen.
Let me try to share the entire screen or the window. Can you see my slide again?
Yes.
Yes, it is being done. Yes.
Now it is okay.
Okay. Well, I promise to let you go in very, very soon. I don't have many slides left.
No.
You carry on.
It's a mishap.
Now, for the example, what I was trying to also give, that when you see somebody, when you see painters or people working outside the house, in the external part of the house, painting the facade or cleaning windows, pretty high up above the ground, you will always see those people are standing on a platform, either made from metal rods and wooden platforms or made with bamboo and all that. If you don't have those platforms, those guys won't be able to stand up, right, that far high above the ground. So you need that kind of a scaffolding effect coming out of these structuring components in liquid system, that emulsifier, to hold the water droplets. If not, you can emulsify. A smaller drop translation goes down, smaller, but here under gravity, because of the density difference, it will fall down. It will separate. So if you have seen any organic liquid margarine in India or outside, you will always see a layer of liquid oil or water, liquid oil on top and water at the bottom. So to prevent that from happening, to keep that guy who's painting your fourth floor wall or cleaning your glass, you don't want that guy to fall. So you need that scaffolding. So that comes from the little bit of the emulsifier. You pass it through a quick crystallization step, allow it to stand, so it starts developing the bond, and then you put in some kind of agitation. So slowly break down the primary bonds enough, so the secondary bonds holds the whole structure together. When we work like this, it still has fluidity. With only 2 to 3% solid fat, everything else can be liquid oil and water. But what is crucial here is the way you crystallize the product. Because unless any disruption in that crystallization happening here, will have a much bigger percent of negative impact on that emulsifier, right? Normal margarines have a lot of solid fat, and you can still manipulate in other ways with 0.5 emulsifier less. But here that's the only structuring component.
Slide is not moving. Stop.
Did it move to this one? Is it
No,
moving
actually, it is not in the slide mode. It is not in the presentation
now?
mode.
Hang on, it does give me the option to say stop sharing. So I thought it was.
No.
You go to slideshow mode.
Slideshow.
Yeah. Well, it was on slide. Yeah. Well, it was on slideshow mode on my computer. Well, I see it.
Here it is not showing that.
Okay, do you see slides changing?
No, it's not changing.
Oh, come on. Oh, PowerPoint has its own times, and hang on, let me just stop sharing and try again. Go to that window. I do entire screen, right? I try to share entire screen.
Yes.
Share. Click share. It didn't work last time.
Where you're sharing, you have to share
Yeah.
the screen.
Correct. That's what was working earlier. It somehow now cancel works, but it's not working as an entire screen. I do have my power is on. Entire screen share. I don't know, for some reason, I think I've lost that.
Entire screen, and then again, you have to click on the entire screen. That's blue thing.
Yes, let me take a picture and I'll send it to you. So I have taken a screenshot.
Okay.
Okay, Averi, I've sent you the screenshot on WhatsApp. So this is what I see. So my
Okay,
entire
that's-
screen is highlighted, and then I press share. It's not going back.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
not.
you
Maybe
have
not.
to. That's.
How does it look now?
Screen now you have to select the screen.
Yes, done.
Yes,
Done.
it's okay.
Yeah. Now, is it changing now?
Yes, it's changing. It's
Okay,
changing.
good.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is
so I
changing.
think my PowerPoint was hungry as well and wanted to go for a quick snack. I'm keeping it from dinner. Sorry. So it needed a... But anyway, so basically when we use these small amounts of fat for structuring, we nucleate it and allow the structure to build up in a holding tank. This is what happens in peanut butter. I'll still show you a few slides how we structure peanut butter. Now, when that small amount of fat is nucleated, crystallized, forming the network, it forms kind of a gel. Literally, you wouldn't believe that by adding 2 to 3% of solid fat, 97% is liquid oil and water, you turn the container, it doesn't flow out. Because those components, the solid fat, has formed that gel network. Next, what we do, we slowly expose it to an agitative force, breaks down the bond, and then it gets fluid, but you will not see the water coming down. So it is very easily possible to make a fluid emulsion by using some high melting components, 2% or 2% or 1.5%, that depends how you extract, how you crystallize it, how much, how much internal phase you are creating. Do you have any protein internal phase to destabilize? But it's easily possible. What we also do is, now that, okay, we have made that product from a production factory, now it's getting pumped into a container that goes to a factory for making any kind of baked products. So it pumped out, stored into the container storage tank of the customer, then it's pumped out again into the production line, right? So any crystallized matrix like this can go through a high shear, low shear, no shear regime, fluctuating up and down. So we need to see, we often try to study what is the level of structure recovery. Then I pump it out, it's fluid, there is a fluid characteristic. Then I put it somewhere, then it's setting, then I'm pumping again. How many cycles can it go? So in this one, I've shown only one, that you put it to high shear, stop the shear, and then at what point the structure breaks and how much it recovers. As a function of C16, C18, C22 ratio of your fat triglyceride and monoglyceride, we can design various levels of structure recovery, depending on what kind of product the customer is willing to make. And of course, some kind of finance is always associated with that. So summarizing all these what we have said, let's talk about a very common application that is globally very popular, more and more popular nowadays, peanut butter. I know there are many peanut butter manufacturers in India. I've spoken to many of them. I've got my fingerprint in many of those products that you buy. What we do, we add something called stabilizer. It's actually a high melting fat emulsifier combination. Because as all nut butters are liquid, nut oils are liquid. So when you are putting a peanuts or in the cashew nuts or almonds through a ball milling step, it gets completely pulverized, completely pasty. And there is a huge tendency of the oil to come out. Typically, the peanut will have late 45 to 50% oil. And if you don't have any component to hold it together, it's going to flow out. No discussions. If you go into any organic peanut butter or stabilizer-free emulsifier, what you have, if you do not see any oiling out, there's always one form of solid fat present that has not been declared. If you have oiling out, chances are it has not been optimally crystallized or it has none as it claims. So it's the same thing as we do earlier, that you add 1 to 1.5% of a high melting emulsifier, and you just start nucleate it, and the network is formed, and you allow everything to develop and settle down inside that peanut jar. So next time you buy a jar of peanut butter or even Nutella, same principle applies there. When you open it, you will see a beautiful shiny surface that covers the entire wall of the neck. If you see a product pull out, that's because of it has been stored a little bit too quickly. Because I think when fat crystallizes, if it crystallizes too fast, it shrinks and product pulls out. So as the network matures inside the peanut jar, it covers an entire surface, the neck or the lip of the jar, edge to edge. Very small crystals forms a smoother surface, so it's got a surface reflectance and it looks shiny. If it is not very well, the crystal sizes are not very good, or there is oiling out, take the oil off as much as you can. If you dig deep, you will see much more matte surface, because the crystal structures are different, so the surface reflectance is not uniform. So typically, then you fill it at 38 degrees, 39 degrees, depending on what kind of stabilizer we use. Keep it at in early 20s for some time, and you've got a beautiful structured matrix. What is very important, should you go and start making any kind of nut paste, nut butter, so anything that has a lot of oil trapped inside, we have to be very aware that what is the field temperature of that product. The field temperature depends on the composition of the stabilizer you're using. Again, depending on the, like I said, the fatty acid chain length, whether it's a unsaturated composition or it's fully saturated, how is it? Is it all very similar, or is it very dissimilar kind of triglyceride? That dictates the fill temperature. Like, anytime you're getting into a car, you will probably adjust the mirror and the distance from the seat, where the level, the height at which the steering is. You always adjust your mirrors, because it will, otherwise it will affect your driving skills. So the stabilizer, every time you change the stabilizer, you get different samples from different suppliers or what you had in your cabinets. The moment you change it, the moment you change the dosage, you're also affecting the whole network process, right from point A to point B, from start to finish. So the rule of thumb is, when you have a much longer chain saturated fat-based triglyceride or monoglycerides, you need to fill it. Triglyceride-based systems crystallize best around 38 degrees. Monoglyceride-based systems, they stabilize at a much higher temperature. If you have a mixture of different fatty acids, different oils, then you've got a gradient of crystallization behavior from it. So anytime you're using any component for any oils and fats matrix to stabilize a liquid component, you have to be aware, are there different type of triglyceride structures you have? How do you know? Look at the component oils. If it is quite diverse, it has 2-3 different types, then you can expect a different triglyceride structure composition, which means they will individually crystallize in a much staggered aspect. So as the product moves from one cooling part to the other, one part is always crystallizing, and this gives you much more stability and handling of production variation. So using all these principles, going down to a different factory in anywhere on the planet, depending on what you make, we have to select different stabilizers or crystallizing product and make it fit to that factory unit. So if you have any lab scale instrument or any pilot plant that may or may not have the flexibility to change, you have to find out what fits the best, what's the best emulsion I can. If these often principles are not correct, and then you are trying to study the effect of an emulsifier on a certain property, how do you know that it has got the exact best crystallization process? So if your fundamental structure is not forming not because of the emulsifier, because of some other parameters, and you conclude that this emulsion, and you grade A 5 emulsions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 based on stabilizers, you might be very wrong in conclusion. So I always say that when you start with any kind of equipment, contraction, whatever setup you have, first try to make a very stable emulsion, whatever it takes. Then find out the processing parameters that give a very stable emulsion or a structured component, whatever it is. You have to first find out how do I measure its stability? Is it a certain viscosity I'm looking at? Is it a visual observation? Is it how is there a precipitation of some sort? Is it an oil coming out in some sort? Is it getting absorbed in an absorbing medium? Am I coating a particular product and keeping an absorbing surface where the oil goes on? Whatever is there, you first have to see how can I have the longest stability. So you get your process sorted, and then you can go and vary different things. So and if that happens, you can always talk to us. We've got a huge footprint in India as well. You can talk to the colleagues or reach out to me, and we can find out what kind of process you need to make proper emulsion on a structured liquid. I think this is my last slide, second last. I think that as we get more and more monoglycerides in not paste, high melting emulsified monoglycerides, it increases the softness. My school of thoughts tells me that when you have a much finer network, imagine one triglycerol, one glycerol backbone with one fatty acid, that the contact point of the network formed from that is much finer compared to when you have three crystal fatty acids. So when you have a much finer packing, it does not have that kind of it does not act as a solid fat to give you much more viscosity. It will trap your oil, but it tends to get much more spread out. In some cases, those peanut butters, nut butters are more preferred. In some countries, you want much more thicker. So depending again, what kind of physical property you want, you build up your physical structure. So in conclusion, you need to know about your operating conditions. You need to have a fair idea of your fat phase compositions and also the physical properties coupled with your cooling units, heat exchange unit that gives you the structure. Overall, I always believe that it is like a Formula One race. When you have, let me stop sharing. To win a Formula One race, you need a very good car. That's your production unit or your lab emulsification and cooling unit. You need a very good driver. That's your process. That's your formulation. And you need a very good supporting team. So all the scholars together, all the people in the production, QC, the guy who's weighing off or whatever, the whole team, including us when we're connected to an R&D team, all these 3 points are exactly equally important. If you don't have a great car, a great driver cannot do anything. If you have a bad driver, a great car will not be put to its maximum output. It's a combination of all these can definitely enable you to structure any kind of liquid component. Takes some time, but that's the fun of being a research scientist, right?
Thank you very much, Kaustuv.
I do see I've taken a lot of time.
Thank you very much. I always get 16 students for dissertation, and it becomes very difficult to find new ideas. You have given me the ideas in the production of these crystallized fats. So probably in the next year, I will contact you. I will find some problems, and I will take your help also to produce new fat products that is a little indigenous from that point of view. Thank you very much.
Someone who has raised his hand.
Yeah, there is a question from the audience.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to ask you. It's a very nice, very interesting talk actually, although not in my field. But one thing I wanted to ask, when you gave the analogy of the marble in the glass, right?
Yeah.
You said, if I understand correctly, you said surface tension and
No,
you said this effect.
surface area of the
Capillary
crystal.
and capillary
Capillary reactions.
Yeah, capillary action. So isn't gravity will also play a role in it?
No, gravity
Yes.
will not play a role because you have all the fat crystal barriers that prevents the movement of the liquid component.
Okay, no, I'm talking about the marble and the water.
Yeah, the gravity will have an effect because that will pull it down, but then it will not be able to still hold it. Like, if gravity was not, it will go down because of gravity. But if you have a packed system, it will flow the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
When you have, let's say it's peanut butter, okay, is all closed on one side, then we should be in principle we should see oiling out happening on the surface or at the bottom. It doesn't, because the pressure is more negative and it tends to come out. So the point is, I see your point, definitely good. So I'll probably have less oiling flow if I'm in the moon, or it will happen faster on Jupiter. But the point is that I do not want it to move.
Okay.
So in that one, the gravity has an effect, it moves. But the sand prevents it to move. That's my basic idea I was trying to say.
Another quick question. So you said the structure you will be solving, you look into the structure using one technique you said DSC, right? So this DSC you look into it's a calorimetric technique if I understand.
Yep.
So you look into the phase separation using DSC, you look into the heat content change and accordingly you modulate it and look into the structure or size of the crystals. That's what DSC is used for in your system?
No, we look at the onset of crystallization and how many peaks to be get based on how much monoglyceride to moisture to fat system we have. So we take the emulsion or the pure the emulsifier or the pure anhydrous fat system with emulsifier. We do individual components, the pure fat matrix, the structuring fat, the emulsifier and the emulsion, and then compare that when you start at what temperature the heat of crystallization is released and how many kilojoules are being released, which is often a telltale sign of this alpha, beta prime or beta form. So it's more of a comparative analysis that a particular product has been crystallized, processed in a certain way. How does that behave? So if we keep my processing constant and change the type of emulsifier or the dosage of emulsifier, what kind of DSC measurements do we get? That we try to correlate. Yeah, so, and very often just one analysis is not always helping us to arrive to a conclusion. Then probably we would look into the crystals and say, okay, how much beta prime beta do we have? We probably look into rheology, that what kind of structural strength are we having? So it's a combination of these 2-3 that helps us to conclude, and also visually that, okay, this is an optimal dosage or optimal process.
So these are the complementary tools.
Sorry?
Complementary tools to look into the same thing.
Correct. So because it's sort of having a hypothesis getting confirmed and cross-checked and validated by other measurements.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Sir, I have two questions. Excellent presentation, sir. I have this question that there is talked about homogeneity, right? So, and you also talked about that there can be a mixture of monoglycerides and triglycerides, and they can form different crystals, right? So, how do you check for the homogeneity, and how do you separate them, like the monoglycerides and triglycerides? So this is my first question, and the second is like I work with proteins, and for setting up a crystal for a protein, so we need to purify the protein and we need to concentrate the protein until it reaches to a certain concentration. So how do you set up for a crystal for a lipid in the lab? Like how do you do it? Like I'm very curious to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the easy answer to the second part is that I have to get back to my wife to get the answer to you, because when it comes to protein, I'm a happy consumer of protein bars, and I add a little bit of protein in emulsion to destabilize or control it. So we don't do much of protein chemistry or crystallization of proteins. But coming back to your first one, that's how do we separate monoglycerides and diglycerides? One thing we can try to do is do the rheology. When you have a rheology system, sometimes we see the shouldering effect under a microscope. It's not always possible. I don't think we can. Instruments, the type of instruments we have. We do have a Raman spectroscopy. We have Raman microscope. We have yet to find that or put that into use. So I think using a Raman microscope, we should be able to probably find more individual peaks for a given molecule. But depending on once it crystallizes, we cannot identify pure monoglycerides. We can do that in pure liquid oil adding a high amount. So we can have some idea, but in a co-crystallized matrix, we can't identify from visually at least the monos from the tris. We can find out from gas chromatography that how much monoglyceride is present in a system. We can do X-ray studies, but there also we cannot always identify if we find more alpha crystals or beta prime in a mix which is actually from the emulsifier or from the triglyceride in a mixed system. We have not been able to. We have not. I don't think we have focused into that part unless we put Raman into play. That's what my best case is.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Sort of an answer to be continued.
Yes, sir, yes.
It's very complicated. We need a huge database to really know at what peak we get, at what molecule does it actually refer to.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, King Siddharth.
Yes, Kaustuv, I have a question. The question to some extent little commercial.
Yeah.
Now the shea butter is a sustainable fat coming into ground, having about 12 million ton production worldwide.
Yeah.
My question is, one of the fraction of the shea butter, that is shea olein, which is having almost 70% oleic acid, can it be used for liquid margarine? Though it is a little commercial question, still I want to understand. Or I can talk to you one-to-one later on.
No, I think I would believe that depending on the handling temperatures, right? Because as long if it does not have too, even if it has too much of, at top of my mind, I can't remember how much diglyceride shea has.
Yes, shea olein has more than 7% diglyceride, 7 to 8%.
Yeah, so that would be one of the points I'm not happy about, and how much other unstrapped matter is there. Any non-triglyceride component you have can delay your crystallization process, right?
No, so that is my question. By the application of the proper your inhibitor or whatever you are using as the crystallizer, is it possible to go along?
Well, I don't think I can give you a direct answer because this is region specific. Shea will be so much more fluid in Asia Pacific or in Africa compared to temperate Western Europe or US, Canada, right? So anywhere, so anywhere it has a much lowering of temperature. That shea, if it does not behave as a pure liquid oil because it has components that is crystallizing at that low temperature, you will lose your fluidity. But then in hotter climates, you will have more fluidity. Like in liquid oils in liquid margarines in Malaysia, it's not always all liquid oil. They have a lot of palm oleins and some amount of palm stearine, but the whole thing is still very fluid.
Yes.
And in some cases you have to pack it a bit uncrystallized because if it is too hard, it's the back pressure in the production plant can be too high to consider still as a liquid product. So it can be done depending on what temperature you have where you are actually applying it.
Fine. Okay. Thank you.
Well, another thing, shea is often used in cosmetic creams, right? You know that? Shea.
Yes, it has a very good cosmetic cream, definitely.
Yes, so when you have most, or if not all cosmetic creams and oil in water emulsions, right?
Yes.
So shea will not behave much, will not give too much of a crystalline behavior. Otherwise, you either see solid fat when you spread it on the skin, or it will have color component will be different. Boiling out is happening. Or it will be non-homogeneous. So shea can be kept in more liquid form, probably more in oil in water emulsions.
That's what how it can be commercially more used because shea fat being a major fat now is a sustainable fat coming out in the soon. The shea olein will be a major fraction which can be used for commercial purpose, especially for
food. I think one of the obstacles is that in entire US you've got so much soybean. In Brazil you've got seed, also a lot of cotton seed in Europe you've got so much of sunflower and rapeseed oil. South of Europe you've got so much of olive oil. So I think food manufacturers or not necessarily look for alternative liquid oils. But in Africa, African palm oil is much softer than Indonesian, Malaysian palm oil is. So if somebody comes out with a sheolene as a liquid oil component, will definitely be.
That's what I also.
And then when we would, at least I would start working with sheolene, I would do more component analysis to find out what's there and study crystallization behavior compared to any other. Liquid oil system. And from there,
That. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very.
My pleasure.
With this, I think we have come to the end of the program. Thank you, Kaustuv, very much for with us these last 2 days and enlightening us various areas which we can work both in the field of oil and in the field of food as well. So thank you very much. In the future, we are looking forward to you to enlighten us with these types of lectures more. Thank you very much. And if in later on also, if students have any questions regarding the emulsifier or the topic which you explained in these 2 days, we will definitely put it in front of you so that you can answer those questions and they can be greatly benefited by it.
Sure. I think another thing we can do that, if you collect some of the questions and you send it to me, maybe I can have a quick chat with the people who have asked. Explain sometimes faster. Explain early. Send back written.
I will share the YouTube link also.
Sorry?
YouTube link. We have streamed it and the YouTube link I will share it with you.
No, but sorry, one more thing. Are you putting this on YouTube? I'm not sure.